The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Park Joon-ho was sitting alone in his office on the 43rd floor of a glass tower overlooking downtown Los Angeles, when his phone shattered the silence. The screen displayed a number he didn't recognize, but something in his gut told him to answer. Something cold, something primal. He pressed the phone to his ear without speaking. Mr. Park. The voice on the other end was calm, almost pleasant, like someone discussing the weather. "We have your daughter." Joon-ho's heart stopped. For 3 full seconds, the world ceased to exist. The city lights below blurred into meaningless streaks. The expensive whiskey in his hand turned to ice water. "If you're lying, Min-ji is wearing pink pajamas with little white rabbits on them. She was clutching a stuffed elephant named Dumbo when we took her. She cried for her mother first, then for you. She's stopped crying now. Children always stop crying eventually." Joon-ho's grip tightened around the phone until the case cracked. His knuckles turned white. His breathing became shallow, controlled, dangerous. "What do you want?" "We want what you took from us, Mr. Park. We want the ledger. We want the account numbers. And we want you to suffer the way you made others suffer. If you touch her, you'll do what? Send your men? Call the police? We both know you won't do either. You have rules, Mr. Park. A code. That's what makes this so perfect." The great Park Joon-ho, the ghost of Koreatown, brought to his knees by the one weakness he could never eliminate. Joon-ho stood slowly. His chair rolled backward and hit the window with a soft thud. Outside, Los Angeles sprawled in every direction, a kingdom of lights and shadows that he had conquered through blood and cunning and patience. But none of that mattered now. Nothing mattered except the voice in his ear and the image of his daughter in the hands of monsters. "Tell me where you are." The caller laughed. "We'll send you the address when we're ready. You have until sunrise to gather what we need. And Mr. Park? Come alone. We'll know if you don't. For every man you bring, we remove one of Min-ji's fingers. She has such delicate little fingers. It would be a shame to waste them." The line went dead. Park Joon-ho stood motionless for exactly 7 seconds. In those 7 seconds, 23 years of carefully constructed control crumbled like ancient walls before a flood. He had built an empire on discipline, on the suppression of emotion, on the absolute certainty that caring about anything made you vulnerable. But Min-ji was different. Min-ji had always been different. He grabbed his coat and moved toward the door with the fluid grace of a predator awakening from a long sleep. His assistant, a young man named Kevin, who had been with him for 3 years, looked up in surprise. "Sir, is everything? Cancel everything." "All of it, sir. You have the meeting with the Yakuza representatives at 8. The real estate deal closes tomorrow." Joon-ho stopped. He turned slowly, and Kevin saw something in his employer's eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. In 3 years of service, he had seen Park Joon-ho angry, disappointed, even coldly furious. But he had never seen this. This was something else entirely. This was the look of a man who had just remembered he had nothing left to lose. "My daughter has been taken." Kevin's face went pale. "Sir, I'll call the team. I'll mobilize everyone. No." Joon-ho's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "This is personal. This I handle myself." He walked out without another word, leaving Kevin standing alone in the empty office, wondering if he had just witnessed the beginning of a war or the end of an era. The elevator descended 43 floors in absolute silence. Joon-ho watched the numbers tick down like a countdown to something inevitable. His reflection stared back at him from the polished steel doors. A man of 52 with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything. Or so he had thought. His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Daddy, I'm scared. They say you're coming. Please come. Please, please, please." Joon-ho's hand trembled. Just once, just for a moment. He typed back with fingers that had signed death warrants and peace treaties with equal steadiness. "I'm coming, my little star. I'm coming." The response came immediately. "That wasn't very smart, Mr. Park. Now she knows you're watching. Now she has hope. Hope makes the disappointment so much worse when it finally arrives." The elevator doors opened onto the underground parking garage. Joon-ho walked past rows of luxury vehicles, Mercedes, BMW, Bentley, until he reached the far corner where a nondescript black sedan waited. No driver, no bodyguards, no witnesses. Tonight, the ghost of Koreatown would hunt alone. As he slid behind the wheel, another memory surfaced unbidden. A memory he had spent decades trying to bury. A memory that explained everything about who he had become and why his daughter's kidnapping had awakened something he thought was long dead. Stay with me, because what Park Joon-ho did next will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, revenge, and the lengths a father will go to protect his child. To understand what happened that night, You need to understand where Park Jun-ho came from. You need to know the boy he used to be before the world stripped away his innocence and left behind something harder, colder, more dangerous. 35 years ago, in the working-class neighborhood of Flushing, Queens, there lived a boy named Park Jun-ho. He was 17 years old, the son of Korean immigrants who had come to America chasing a dream that always seemed to stay just out of reach. His father, Park Sung-min, worked 16-hour days at a dry cleaning shop owned by a man who paid him half what he promised and twice the disrespect he deserved. His mother, Park Mi-young, cleaned houses for wealthy families on Long Island, coming home each night with aching knees and stories about beautiful children who had everything Junho's family could never afford. But they had each other, they had love, and most importantly, Junho had his little sister, Park Soo-min. Soo-min was 11 years old, all bright eyes and boundless energy. She believed in magic, in superheroes, in the fundamental goodness of the universe. She believed, with the unshakable faith of a child, that her big brother could solve any problem and defeat any monster. "Appa," she would say, using the Korean term for older brother, "when you grow up, will you buy us a big house with a swimming pool? The biggest house in America," Junho always replied, "and the pool will be shaped like a star, just for you. Promise?" "I promise." Those were the words that haunted him. Those were the words that defined everything he became. The night everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Junho was working his after-school job at a Korean grocery store 3 blocks from their apartment. The owner, Mr. Kim, was teaching him about inventory management and customer service. Skills he said would be useful when Junho went to college. College. The word felt like a foreign language. His parents could barely afford rent. College was a fantasy, a dream belonging to other families, wealthier families, American families who didn't have to count every penny and pray each month that the landlord wouldn't raise the rent again. But Mr. Kim believed in him. Mr. Kim said he had potential. At 8:47 p.m., the store's phone rang. "Mr. Kim answered, and Junho watched his face transform from polite professionalism to shock to horror to something that looked like physical pain. "Junho," Mr. Kim said, his voice cracking, "you need to go home. Now. Right now." "What happened?" "Your mother called. There was an accident." Junho ran. He ran through streets that suddenly seemed endless, past faces that blurred into meaningless shapes. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed, and still he ran, because something in Mr. Kim's eyes had told him that nothing would ever be the same again. The police cars were already there when he arrived. Red and blue lights splashed across the brick facade of their apartment building like blood and tears. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering in Korean and English and Spanish, their faces painted with the same expression of terrible fascination that humans wear when they witness tragedy happening to someone else. Junho pushed through the crowd. A police officer tried to stop him, but he slipped past with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for air. His mother was sitting on the front steps, her face empty, her eyes seeing something that wasn't there. His father stood beside her, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, his mouth moving in what might have been prayer. "Where's Soo-min?" Junho demanded. "Where's my sister?" His mother looked at him, through him, past him, into a future that had just become unbearable. "They took her," she whispered. "Men came. They took our baby." The story emerged in fragments over the next few hours, pieced together from his mother's broken testimony and the cold efficiency of police reports. A local gang had been expanding their territory. They needed money to fund their operations, and they had identified the Korean community as easy targets. Hard-working immigrants who feared authorities, who preferred to handle problems quietly, who could be intimidated into silence. They had come to the Park family's apartment looking for cash, for valuables, for anything they could sell, but Park Sung-min and Park Mi-young had nothing worth stealing, just poverty, just dreams. Just a little girl who had been doing her homework at the kitchen table when the door crashed open. The gang members had taken Soo-min as insurance, a way to guarantee the family's cooperation, a living, breathing, 11-year-old insurance policy with bright eyes and belief in magic. "Pay us $10,000 by Friday," they had said, "or you'll never see her again." $10,000. To a family that counted quarters for laundry money, it might as well have been 10 million. Junho went to the police. He begged them to help, to find his sister, to bring her home. The detective assigned to the case was a tired man named Morrison, who had seen too many similar stories end in too many similar tragedies. "We're doing everything we can, son," Detective Morrison said, not meeting Junho's eyes. "But these situations, they're complicated. The gang involved has connections. Witnesses tend to disappear. Evidence gets lost. I'm not saying we won't try, but I want you to be prepared for..." "Prepared for what?" Junho's voice cracked with desperation. "Prepared to never see my sister again. Prepared to tell my parents that America, the land of opportunity, the country they sacrificed everything to reach, can't protect an 11-year-old girl from monsters." Morrison sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had given up on justice long before this conversation began. "I'm sorry, kid, I really am. But the world isn't fair. The sooner you learn that, the easier life becomes." Those words became the foundation of everything Park Junho would build. The community tried to help. Korean church members pooled their resources, holding fundraisers and bake sales. Local business owners contributed what they could spare. Mr. Kim emptied his savings account and pressed the cash into Junho's hands, with tears streaming down his weathered face. By Thursday night, they had gathered $7,300. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Junho made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He went to the neighborhood's other power structure, not the police, who had already proven their uselessness. Not the churches, which offered prayers but not protection. He went to the Korean men who operated in the spaces between legality and survival, the ones who ran gambling operations and protection rackets and import businesses that sometimes imported more than their manifests declared. Their leader was a man named Kwon Tae-sik. He listened to Junho's story with an expression that revealed nothing. When the boy finished speaking, Kwon Tae-sik simply nodded. "Your family owes this gang $10,000. Yes, and the police won't help." "No." "What would you be willing to do to save your sister?" Junho didn't hesitate. "Anything." Kwon Tae-sik smiled. It was not a warm smile. "That's what I wanted to hear." The Korean men moved that night. Junho wasn't there when they confronted the gang. He was told to stay home, to comfort his parents, to wait. But he heard about what happened afterward. Everyone in the neighborhood heard. The gang members were found the next morning in an abandoned warehouse near the docks. They were alive, but they would never intimidate another immigrant family. They would never take another child. Several of them would never walk properly again. And Sumin was found tied to a chair in the warehouse's back office. Frightened, but unharmed, she ran into Junho's arms when he arrived, sobbing his name over and over like a prayer finally answered. "Appa came," she cried. "I knew you would come. I knew it. I told them you would come and make everything okay." Junho held his sister and made a silent vow. Never again. Never again would he be powerless while someone he loved suffered. Never again would he rely on systems that didn't care about people like his family. Never again would he wait for justice that would never arrive. He started working for Kwon Tae-sik the following week. At first it was simple tasks, deliveries, messages, standing guard at card games. But Kwon Tae-sik saw something in the 17-year-old boy. Something hard, something hungry, something that could be shaped into a weapon. Over the next 3 decades, Park Junho rose through the ranks of Korean organized crime in America with the same relentless determination that had driven his parents across an ocean. He learned everything: negotiation, intimidation, the subtle art of making problems disappear without leaving traces. He built alliances with the Yakuza, the Triads, even certain Italian families who recognized a kindred spirit. By the time he was 35, Junho controlled most of Koreatown in Los Angeles. By 40, his influence extended throughout the West Coast. By 50, he was simply known as the Ghost, a man who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, whose name was spoken in whispers, whose very existence served as both threat and promise. But through all of it, he never forgot his sister. Sumin had grown up, married a good man, moved to a quiet suburb in New Jersey, where she raised 3 children who knew nothing about their uncle's true occupation. She thought Junho was a successful businessman, an investor, a man who had achieved the American dream through hard work and intelligence. He let her believe that. He funded her children's education, bought her family a beautiful house, made sure she never wanted for anything. It was the only way he knew to keep the promise he had made to her all those years ago. And then, 5 years ago, something happened that changed everything. Park Junho fell in love. Her name was Kim Yuna, and she walked into his life like sunrise after a decade of darkness. They met at a charity gala, one of the legitimate functions Junho attended to maintain his public image as a philanthropic businessman. Yuna was a cellist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, a woman of extraordinary talent and even more extraordinary beauty. She had no idea who he really was. She saw only the cultured, generous man who donated millions to arts education and spoke eloquently about the importance of giving back to the community. Junho knew he should stay away from her. A woman like Yuna deserved better than a man with blood on his hands and secrets that could fill a cemetery. But for the first time in his life, he found himself unable to follow his own rules. They dated for a year before he told her the truth, all of it. He expected her to run, to scream, to call the police. Instead, she listened in silence, her beautiful face revealing nothing. And when he finished, she asked only one question. The people you hurt, did they deserve it? Most of them, he admitted. Not all. And the ones who didn't deserve it, do they haunt you every night? Yuna was silent for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. I'm not going to pretend I understand your world, she said. I'm not going to pretend I approve of it, but I know who you are when you're with me. I know the man you could be if you let yourself, and I think that man is worth fighting for. They were married 6 months later in a private ceremony attended only by close family. Sumin cried through the entire thing, overjoyed that her brother had finally found happiness. And when Yuna became pregnant a year later, Junho experienced something he thought he had lost the capacity to feel. Hope. Pure, unguarded, terrifying hope. Minji was born on a warm September evening, screaming her objections to the bright lights and cold air of the hospital room. She was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ancient souls. Junho held his daughter for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face, tears he hadn't shed in 30 years. Not since the night Sumin was taken. I will protect you, he whispered to the squirming bundle in his arms. I will protect you from everything. I will never let anyone hurt you. I promise. It was the same promise he had made to Sumin, the same promise that had driven him to build an empire of shadows and violence. But this time he swore it would be different. This time he would keep his promise without becoming a monster. For 5 years he tried. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his organization. He delegated authority, trusted lieutenants, focused on legitimate business ventures. He was there for Minji's first steps, her first words, her first day of school. He read her bedtime stories about brave princesses and magical kingdoms. He pushed her on swings and caught her at the bottom of slides and told her over and over that she was his little star, and nothing in the universe could ever dim her light. Yuna watched this transformation with cautious optimism. She never fully trusted that the darkness in her husband was gone. How could she? But she believed in his desire to change, in his love for their daughter, in the possibility of redemption. And then came the night when redemption proved insufficient. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a like on this video. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this story ends. Now, back to the present. Back to the night everything fell apart. Park Junho drove through the streets of Los Angeles with the precision of a man who had mapped every escape route and dead end in his mind decades ago. His phone sat in the passenger seat, a black mirror that reflected nothing but his own controlled panic. The kidnappers had made a mistake. Several mistakes, actually, but one in particular that would prove fatal. They had mentioned a ledger, account numbers, things that Junho had supposedly taken from them. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunity crime. This was targeted, specific, personal. He ran through the possibilities as he drove. The Russians? No. They had made peace 3 years ago, sealed with a business partnership that benefited both sides. The Mexicans? Unlikely. They had no reason to start a war over matters that had been settled long before Minji was born. The Vietnamese? The Chinese? Each possibility led nowhere. And then it clicked. The Serpent Syndicate. 3 years ago, Junho had dismantled an operation that had been trafficking young women from Southeast Asia. He had done it quietly, efficiently, without claiming credit or leaving witnesses. The girls had been sent to safety. The traffickers had been dealt with. And the man who ran the operation, a monster named Chen Wei, had disappeared into the federal prison system after Junho anonymously delivered evidence to the FBI. Chen Wei had sworn revenge from his prison cell. He had promised that Junho would suffer the way his victims had suffered. But Chen Wei was serving 40 years to life. He wasn't a threat anymore, unless he had friends, unless he had family, unless his empire hadn't died with his imprisonment, but had simply gone underground, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Junho pulled over and made a call to his most trusted lieutenant, a man named Lee Dong-hyun, who had been with him for over 20 years. Dong-hyun, wake up. Boss, what's wrong? It's 3 in the morning. Minji has been taken. I need information and I need it now. The silence on the other end lasted only a second, but it was enough to communicate everything. Shock, horror, fury, and then cold professionalism taking over. "Tell me everything." Junho recounted the phone call, the messages, the demands. When he finished, Donghyun's voice was tight with controlled anger. "The Serpent Syndicate. It has to be. Chen Wei's brother Chen Lin has been quietly rebuilding their network for the past 2 years. We thought he was focused on the West Coast drug trade, but apparently he's been planning something bigger. Where would they take her? I'll find out. Give me an hour. You have 30 minutes. Boss, they said to come alone. If we mobilize, I will come alone, but I need to know where I'm going. I need to know what I'm walking into, and I need to know exactly how many people will die tonight." Donghyun's response carried the weight of 2 decades of loyalty. "I'll have the information in 20 minutes. Junho ended the call and continued driving. He had a destination in mind, not the kidnapper's location, which he didn't yet know, but somewhere equally important, his old armory. In the early days of his rise to power, Junho had established safe houses throughout the city, places where weapons could be stored, where wounded men could recover, where important meetings could happen away from prying eyes. Most of them had been decommissioned over the years, as he transitioned to more legitimate operations. But one remained, a warehouse in the industrial district near the port, disguised as a storage facility for restaurant equipment. Inside, behind false walls and biometric locks, waited everything he would need for tonight. The warehouse was dark when he arrived. No guards, no surveillance that could be hacked or bribed, just emptiness and shadows and the ghosts of a past he had tried to leave behind. Junho entered through a side door, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He navigated by memory, past rows of dusty commercial refrigerators and broken prep tables until he reached the back wall. A hidden panel responded to his fingerprint. A secondary panel responded to his retinal scan. The false wall slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside was an arsenal, guns of every caliber, from compact pistols to military-grade rifles, Kevlar vests and tactical gear, blades of various lengths, from pocket knives to the elegant curved sword his mentor Quan Tai-sik had given him 30 years ago. Explosives, communications equipment, medical supplies. Junho moved through the room with practiced efficiency, selecting what he would need. A Glock 19 for close work, a Sig Sauer P226 as backup, a ceramic knife that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, body armor that could be worn beneath civilian clothing, extra magazines, a first aid kit, and one item that wasn't a weapon at all, a small stuffed rabbit that Minji had lost during a visit to this warehouse 2 years ago. Junho had found it afterward and kept it here, meaning to return it, but somehow never getting around to it. He picked up the rabbit and held it to his face, breathing in the faint scent of his daughter that still clung to the worn fabric. His hands, which had remained steady throughout the night, trembled. "I'm coming, little star," he whispered. "Daddy's coming." His phone buzzed. "Donghyun, boss, I have the location. Chen Lin is operating out of an old textile factory in Vernon. It was officially condemned 3 years ago, but our sources say there's been activity there for the past 6 months. Guards, vehicles coming and going at odd hours. This is their base. How many men? Best estimate, 15 to 20.
Heavily armed. They're expecting you." "Of course they are." Junho tucked the stuffed rabbit into his jacket pocket. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." "Boss, you can't go in alone against 20 men. Let me send a team. We can surround the building, cut off their escape routes, and they'll kill Minji the moment they see anyone besides me approaching. No, this has to be done my way. Then at least let me come with you. One man to watch your back." Junho considered this.
Donghyun was one of the few people in the world he trusted completely. They had survived impossible situations together. They had buried friends together. They had built an empire together. Follow at a distance. "If I'm not out in 2 hours, burn the factory to the ground. Don't let anyone escape." And Donghyun, "Yes, boss. If I don't make it out, there's a letter in my desk safe. The combination is Minji's birthday. Make sure my wife and daughter are taken care of. Make sure they never want for anything. And make sure they know," Junho's voice cracked, just for a moment. "Make sure they know I love them more than my own life." "You'll tell them yourself," Donghyun replied. "Because you're Park Junho, the ghost of Koreatown, and I've seen you walk out of situations that would have killed any other man. You'll get your daughter back, and you'll come home, and 20 years from now, we'll be old men sitting on a beach somewhere telling stories about the night you took on 20 armed men alone and made them regret ever being born. Despite everything." Junho smiled. "I'll see you on that beach, old friend." He ended the call, gathered his equipment, and walked back into the night. The Vernon Industrial District was a wasteland of abandoned factories and crumbling warehouses, a monument to manufacturing jobs that had fled overseas decades ago. At 4 in the morning, the streets were empty except for rats and the occasional homeless person seeking shelter from the cold. The textile factory rose against the pre-dawn sky like a rotting tooth, its broken windows staring down at the surrounding desolation with empty malevolence. Junho parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows, moving with the silent grace that had earned him his nickname. 2 guards at the main entrance, armed with automatic weapons, talking softly to each other, their attention divided between watching the street and checking their phones, sloppy. Chen Lin had hired muscle, not professionals. Junho circled the building, cataloging entrances, counting the guards he could see through gaps in the boarded windows. Dong Hyun's estimate had been accurate, roughly 18 men visible, possibly more inside. They were confident, relaxed, convinced that their hostage gave them all the leverage they needed. They were wrong. At the back of the building, a fire escape ladder hung from the 2nd floor, rusted but functional. Junho tested it with one hand, then began to climb with the controlled patience of a spider ascending its web. The 2nd floor was a maze of abandoned machinery and collapsed ceilings. Junho moved through the debris without making a sound, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, his ears straining for any indication of where they were holding Minji. Voices, coming from deeper in the building. Male voices, speaking Mandarin and Korean and occasional broken English. Junho followed the sound, slipping past piles of moldy fabric and overturned sewing machines, until he reached a doorway that overlooked the factory's main floor. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. Minji was there, sitting in a metal chair in the center of the floor. Her hands were bound behind her back. Her pink pajamas were torn and dirty. Her face was streaked with tears, but she was alive. She was breathing. She was staring at the floor with the shell-shocked stillness of a child who had seen too much too fast. Standing beside her was a thin man in an expensive suit, Chen Lin. Judging by his resemblance to the photographs Dong Hyun had shown him years ago, where Chen Wei had been large and brutal, his brother was slender and refined, with the cold eyes of a man who enjoyed causing pain in sophisticated ways. "Your father should be here soon," Chen Lin was saying to Minji in accented English. "When he arrives, you'll watch him die. Then we'll discuss what happens to you." Minji didn't respond. She didn't move. She didn't seem to register that anyone was speaking to her at all. Junho's hands tightened on the doorframe. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to rush in, to grab his daughter, to tear Chen Lin apart with his bare hands. But he forced himself to think. 18 men, maybe 20, all armed. One wrong move and Minji would be dead before he reached her. He needed a different approach. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to the unknown number that had called him. "I'm outside. I have what you want. Let me see my daughter is unharmed before I come in." The response came within seconds. "Very well. Come to the main entrance. Hands visible. Any weapons? Any tricks? And the girl pays the price." Junho descended from the 2nd floor using a different route, emerging from the shadows near the front of the building. The 2 guards he had spotted earlier raised their weapons as he appeared, but he simply held up his hands, showing his empty palms. "Chen Lin is expecting me." The guards exchanged glances. Then one of them spoke into a radio. A moment later, the factory's main doors creaked open. Junho walked inside. The main floor was better lit than he expected, with portable generators powering construction lights that cast harsh white glare across the concrete. Chen Lin stood next to Minji, one hand resting casually on the back of her chair. A dozen armed men formed a loose semicircle around them, their weapons trained on Junho with varying degrees of professionalism. "Park Junho," Chen Lin said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "The ghost of Koreatown, the man who destroyed my brother. You look older than I expected." "Daddy!" Minji's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She was looking at him now, her eyes wide with fear and hope and desperate longing. She tried to stand, but the ropes binding her kept her in place. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I tried to be brave, but I was so scared and—" "It's okay, little star." Junho's voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had everything under control even though his heart was screaming. "Daddy's here now. Everything's going to be okay." Chen Lin laughed. How touching. The fearsome crime lord, brought to his knees by his love for a child. "My brother always said you were different from the others. He said you had a weakness hidden somewhere beneath all that ice." It appears he was right. Your brother was a monster who trafficked children. What I did to him was justice. My brother was a businessman who recognized opportunities in human cargo. What you did to him was theft. Theft of his freedom, his fortune, his future, and now you'll pay the price. Junho took a step forward. Every gun in the room tracked his movement. "The ledger you want? The account numbers? I have them. Let my daughter go, and they're yours. You have them. Where? In my coat pocket. Digital copy on a flash drive. Once Minji is safely outside this building, I'll give it to you. Chen-Lin smiled. It was a predator's smile, the expression of someone who enjoyed watching prey struggle. I don't think you understand your situation, Mr. Park. You're not negotiating. You're not making demands. You're a father who walked into a room full of armed men to save his daughter. That's admirable. It's also stupid. Daddy, Minji's voice was trembling. It's okay, little star. I need you to close your eyes for me. Can you do that? Close your eyes and count to 10. But trust me. Close your eyes. Count to 10. Minji looked at him with those trusting eyes, the same eyes Sumin had turned on him 35 years ago, when she believed her big brother could solve any problem. Slowly, reluctantly, she closed her eyes. 1, she whispered. Junho moved. Later, the few survivors would struggle to describe what happened. They would speak of shadows that seemed to solidify into violence. They would describe a man who moved like water through rocks, flowing around obstacles, finding gaps where no gaps should exist. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Park Junho had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Every fight, every negotiation, every close call had been training for the night when everything he loved hung in the balance. When Minji started counting, he became something more than human. He became the ghost. 2. The first guard fell before anyone realized Junho had moved. A knife through the throat, so fast the man was dead before he could cry out. 3. 2 more guards went down. The suppressed whisper of Junho's pistol barely audible above the hum of the generators. 4. The room erupted into chaos. Men shouted, weapons discharged. Bullets tore through the air where Junho had been a fraction of a second earlier. But he was already somewhere else, always somewhere else. A shadow that killed and moved and killed again. 5. Chen-Lin grabbed Minji, yanking her from the chair and holding her against his chest like a shield. A small pistol appeared in his hand, pressed against the little girl's temple. Stop! Stop or I'll kill her. Everything froze. Junho stood in the center of the carnage, surrounded by bodies and the handful of guards still standing. Blood spattered his face, his clothes, his hands. He looked like something from a nightmare, something summoned from the darkest places of human fear. 6, Minji whimpered, her eyes still closed. Open your eyes, little girl, Chen-Lin hissed. I want you to see your father watch you die. Minji didn't respond. She kept counting. 7. I'll kill her. I swear to God, I'll... No, you won't. Junho's voice was utterly calm. There was no fear in it. No desperation, no uncertainty, just the absolute conviction of a man who knew exactly how this story would end. If you pull that trigger, you'll be dead before the bullet reaches her brain. You know this. Your men know this. Everyone in this room has seen what I can do. So let me offer you an alternative. What alternative? Let her go. Walk away. I'll give you the ledger, the accounts, everything. I'll let you leave this building alive. You can rebuild somewhere else, somewhere far from my territory. You'll never have your revenge, but you'll have your life. Chen-Lin's hand trembled. The gun wavered against Minji's temple. 8, Minji counted. Or, Junho continued, you can kill my daughter, and I will spend every remaining moment of my existence hunting down everyone you've ever loved, everyone who ever worked for you, everyone who ever spoke your name with respect. I will destroy everything you've ever built. I will make your brother's fate look like mercy. And when I finally find you, Chen-Lin, I will make you beg for death for a very, very long time. 9. The remaining guards looked at each other. One by one, they lowered their weapons. One by one, they stepped back. Chen-Lin was alone. Your men understand, Junho said. They understand what happens next. The only question is whether you're smart enough to understand it too. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Chen-Lin's grip loosened. His gun hand dropped to his side, and Minji ran. She ran across the blood-slicked floor, past the bodies, past the guards who didn't try to stop her. She ran into her father's arms and buried her face against his chest, and sobbed with the full-body release of a child who had been holding everything inside for hours. 10! She screamed into his shirt. I did it, Daddy. I counted to 10. Junho held his daughter as if she were made of glass and precious metals. His hands shook. His eyes burned with tears he didn't try to hide. All the violence, all the death, all the blood. None of it mattered. Only this moment. Only this warmth against his chest. Only this life he had saved. You did so good, little star, he whispered. You were so brave. The bravest girl in the whole world. Can we go home now? Yes, sweetheart. We're going home now. Junho lifted Minji and turned toward the door. Behind him, Chen-Lin stood frozen, his face a mask of impotent fury. This isn't over, Chen-Lin called out. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. I'll come for you. I'll come for your family. Junho paused.
He didn't turn around. "Dong-hyun," he said, and his lieutenant emerged from the shadows near the side entrance, shadows that hadn't been empty at all. "Make sure Mr. Chen understands the consequences of his choices tonight." "With pleasure, boss." Junho carried his daughter out of the factory, into the pre-dawn light, toward the car where Dong-hyun's men were already waiting to escort them home. Behind them, the warehouse doors swung shut. What happened to Chen Lin after that was never officially recorded, but whispers spread through the criminal underworld. Whispers about a man who had tried to hurt the ghost's daughter and had learned, in exhaustive detail, why some mistakes could never be repeated. 1 year later, the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of a beautiful home in Pacific Palisades, painting golden rectangles across hardwood floors. In the backyard, a little girl with dark hair and her father's eyes ran laughing through a sprinkler system, chasing a golden retriever puppy named, appropriately, Ghost. Park Jun-ho sat on the patio, watching his daughter play. His wife Yuna sat beside him, her hand resting on his where it lay on the arm of the chair. "She seems happy," Yuna said. "She is happy. The therapist says she's made incredible progress. Children are resilient. And you? How are you?" Junho considered the question. A year ago he would have deflected, changed the subject, retreated behind the walls he had spent decades building. But things were different now. He was different now. "I'm learning," he admitted. "Learning that protecting your family doesn't always mean building fortresses and destroying enemies. Sometimes it means being present, being vulnerable, letting them see who you really are." Yuna squeezed his hand. "That sounds like growth. It feels like terror, constant, unrelenting terror that I'm not enough, that I can't keep them safe, that everything I've built will collapse and take them down with it. And yet here you are, sitting in the sunshine, watching your daughter play, holding your wife's hand. Despite all that terror." Junho turned to look at her. Really look at her, the way he had during those early days when falling in love had felt like falling off a cliff into impossible light. "Because of you," he said. "Because you showed me that surviving isn't the same as living. And because a little girl reminded me of a promise I made 35 years ago." Minji came running up to the patio, the puppy yapping at her heels. Her face was flushed with joy. Her pajamas, clean ones now, without cartoon unicorns. She had refused to wear anything with unicorns since that night, soaked with sprinkler water. "Daddy! Daddy! Ghost learned a new trick. Watch!" She produced a soggy treat from her pocket and held it above the puppy's head. Ghost sat, then lay down, then rolled over with varying degrees of success. "That's amazing, little star. You're such a good trainer. Can we get another puppy? Please, please, please? Ghost needs a friend." Junho laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep inside where laughter had been locked away for decades. "Let's see how you do with one puppy first. Then we'll talk." Minji pouted, but it was the theatrical pout of a child who knew she would eventually get her way. She scooped up Ghost and carried him back to the sprinklers, already planning her next negotiating strategy. Yuna leaned her head against Junho's shoulder. "She has your stubbornness. She has your heart. Thank God." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play. The shadows of the past were still there. They would always be there, but they seemed less oppressive somehow, less defining, less permanent. Junho's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from his sister, Soo-min. "Junho, are you still coming for dinner next Sunday? The kids want to show Uncle Matt their school projects, and I'm making your favorite japchae. No excuses." He smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. See you Sunday." Somewhere in Queens, a woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes read his message and felt the same warmth she had always felt when her big brother kept his promises. Some stories have neat endings. Heroes triumph, villains fall, everyone lives happily ever after. But real life is messier than that. Real life is about compromises and complications and the constant struggle to be better than you were yesterday. Park Jun-ho didn't become a saint after that night in the warehouse. He didn't dismantle his organization or confess his sins or surrender to authorities. He was still a powerful man in a dangerous world, still capable of terrible things when terrible things were required. But he was also a father who had learned that love wasn't a weakness to be guarded against. He was a husband who had discovered that vulnerability could be its own kind of strength. He was a man who had kept a promise to a frightened little girl. 2 frightened little girls, separated by 35 years, but connected by the same desperate need to believe that someone would come when they called for help. And every night, before Minji went to sleep, he would sit beside her bed and tell her stories, not about brave knights or rescued princesses, but about people who made mistakes and faced consequences and found redemption in unexpected places, about monsters who turned out to be lonely and heroes who turned out to be flawed, about a world that wasn't fair but was still worth fighting for. "Daddy," Minji said one night, after a story about a boy who had lost everything and built something new from the ashes. "Yes, little star? You're the boy in the story, aren't you? The one who lost his sister?" Junho was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." "What was her name?" "Sumin. Her name was Sumin." "Is she in heaven now? Like the grandparents I never met?" Junho smiled. "No, actually. She's not in heaven. She's in New Jersey." Minji looked confused. "New Jersey isn't heaven. Your Aunt Sumin is alive and well and very excited to see you next Sunday. She has 3 kids who are going to teach you how to make kimchi." Minji's eyes went wide with delight. "I have cousins? Why didn't you tell me I have cousins? I was saving it as a surprise." "Are you surprised?" Minji launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck with the fierce enthusiasm of a 6-year-old who had just discovered the universe was bigger and more wonderful than she had imagined. "The best surprise!" Junho held his daughter and breathed in the scent of her shampoo, strawberries and vanilla, the smell of innocence. The smell of everything worth protecting in this brutal, beautiful world. "You know what, little star? I think you're right. I think this is the best surprise. Thank you so much for watching until the end. This story is a reminder that even in the darkest places, love can light the way home. Even the hardest hearts can learn to feel again. And sometimes, the person who answers when you cry for help turns out to be exactly who you needed all along. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to keep a promise. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. And let me know in the comments, what would you do to protect the people you love? What promises have you made that shaped who you became? Until next time, remember, the monsters are real, but so are the people who fight them. Sometimes they're the same person, separated only by the choices they make and the promises they choose to keep. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you in the next video. The end. Can I hide here? My father is trying to. A little girl knocked on the Mafia's door at 2 a.m. 1336 architected complete narrative rewrite. Maintaining dramatic tension and emotional resonance. The user wants me to rewrite the original script with a new title. Can I hide here? My father is trying to. A little girl knocked on the Mafia's door at 2 a.m. I need to rewrite the entire narrative from scratch with new phrases, keep the same dramatic viral tone, adapt names, places, and cultural details appropriately, maintain the emotional impact and narrative order, keep similar length, 40-70K characters, start with the title, include CTAs at the beginning and middle, write in English. Let me create a completely new version based on the original story about a mafia boss who receives a message from a scared child and goes to help, discovering his own redemption in the process. Can I hide here? My father is trying to. A little girl knocked on the Mafia's door at 2 a.m. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a video. Drop a like right now. It really helps the channel grow, and I want to know, where are you watching from today? Comment your city or state below. New York? Florida? Maybe somewhere across the ocean? Let me know. Now let's get into a story that will stay with you long after it ends. The knock came at 2:17 in the morning. Not a timid knock, not the polite tap of someone who wasn't sure they had the right address. This was desperate, frantic. The kind of knocking that sounds like a heartbeat trying to escape a chest. Dominic Caruso was awake, as he always was at this hour. Sleep had become a stranger to him years ago, chased away by memories that preferred the darkness. He sat in his study on the 3rd floor of his Brooklyn brownstone, a glass of whiskey untouched on the mahogany desk before him, staring at nothing in particular. The knocking continued, louder now, more urgent. His security team would handle it. They always did. Dominic Caruso didn't answer his own door. Not anymore. Not for 20 years. Not since he had become the kind of man whose doorstep attracted both supplicants and assassins in equal measure. But something made him stand. Something made him walk to the window that overlooked the front steps. Something made him look down at the source of that desperate sound. What he saw stopped his heart. A child. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing on his doorstep in a thin nightgown that offered no protection against the February cold. Her feet were bare. Her dark hair was tangled and wild, and even from 3 floors up, Dominic could see she was shaking, not just from the cold, but from something far worse. Terror. Pure, primal terror. His security detail was already moving toward the door, hands reaching for weapons,
preparing to deal with this unexpected visitor the way they dealt with all unexpected visitors. But Dominic was faster. He was down the stairs before his men could react, crossing the marble foyer with strides that ate up the distance, reaching the heavy oak door and throwing it open before anyone could stop him. The little girl looked up at him. She had blue eyes, wide, frightened blue eyes that held the kind of fear no child should ever know. Her lips were cracked and pale. Her arms were wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to stop the shivering. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the winter wind. "Can I hide here? My father is trying to—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Dominic Caruso had built an empire on violence. He had ordered deaths, sanctioned suffering, made grown men weep and beg for mercy that never came. He was feared throughout the 5 boroughs and beyond. A name spoken in whispers, a shadow that fell across the dreams of anyone foolish enough to cross him. But in that moment, looking down at this trembling child who had somehow found her way to his door in the dead of night, something cracked inside him. Something he thought had calcified long ago, turning to stone to protect him from the weight of his own sins. "Come inside," he said, and his voice was gentler than it had been in decades. The girl hesitated. Even in her terror, some survival instinct warned her that the man before her was dangerous, that this house, this fortress of dark wood and darker secrets, was not a place of safety. "I won't hurt you," Dominic said. "I promise." He didn't know why he made that promise. He didn't know why this child, this stranger, had awakened something in him that he thought was dead and buried, but the words came out before he could stop them, and once they were spoken, he knew he would keep them. The girl took a shaky step forward, then another, then she was inside, and Dominic was closing the door against the cold, and the night, and whatever monster had driven her to flee into the darkness. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Martinez." "Sophie, that's a beautiful name. My name is Dominic. Can you tell me what happened? Can you tell me why you're out here alone?" Sophie's lower lip trembled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "My daddy, he gets angry sometimes. Really angry. He hurts Mommy. Tonight he, She couldn't continue. The sobs took over, shaking her small body like leaves in a storm. Dominic felt something ignite in his chest, something hot and dangerous and utterly foreign to the cold calculation that usually governed his decisions. He had hurt people, many people, for many reasons, but never children, never women. That was a line he had drawn early in his career, a boundary that separated him from the truly monstrous. And now this girl, this Sophie, had appeared on his doorstep like a ghost, reminding him that monsters didn't always wear expensive suits and run criminal empires. Sometimes they wore ordinary faces and lived in ordinary houses and destroyed their families behind closed doors where no one could see. Boss, one of his security men, a hulking figure named Marcus, stood in the doorway to the foyer. "What do you want us to do?" Dominic looked at Sophie, looked at the bruises on her arms that he hadn't noticed before, purple and yellow, old and new, a timeline of suffering written on her skin. "Get her something warm to wear," he said, "and something to eat. She's staying." "But boss..." "She's staying, Marcus. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me personally." Marcus knew better than to argue. He nodded and disappeared, leaving Dominic alone with the child who had somehow, impossibly, breached every defense he had built around himself and his home. "Sophie," Dominic said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Where do you live? Where's your mother right now?" "Home," Sophie whispered. "Daddy's still there, with Mommy. He said if I told anyone he'd kill her. He said he'd kill us both." The fire in Dominic's chest blazed brighter. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "I need you to tell me your address. Can you do that?" Sophie shook her head frantically. "No, he'll know. He always knows. Please, I just want to hide, just for tonight. Please don't make me go back." Dominic reached out slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, feeling how thin she was, how fragile, how desperately she needed someone, anyone, to protect her. "Listen to me, Sophie. I'm not going to make you go back. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you ever again. But your Mommy is still there with your daddy, and she might need help too. I want to go help her. Will you let me do that?" Sophie looked at him with those 2 old eyes, eyes that had seen too much, endured too much, learned too young that the world was cruel and adults couldn't be trusted. "You promise?" she asked. "You promise you won't let him hurt us anymore?" Dominic Caruso, the most feared crime boss in Brooklyn, felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked away for so long he had forgotten it existed. "I promise," he said, "On my life, Sophie, I promise." She told him the address. "Stay with me until the very end, because what Dominic discovered when he reached that house will change everything you think you know about redemption, revenge, and the unexpected places where heroes are born. To understand what happened next, to truly understand why a little girl's knock on a door at 2 a.m. transformed one of the most dangerous men in New York, you need to know who Dominic Caruso used to be. 32 years ago, before the money and the power and the blood, there was a boy named Nico. Nico Caruso grew up in Bensonhurst, in a cramped apartment above a bakery that filled the air with the smell of fresh bread every morning. His father, Giuseppe, worked at the docks, loading and unloading cargo ships until his back gave out and his dreams gave up. His mother, Maria, cleaned houses for wealthy families in Manhattan, returning each night with stories about children who had their own bedrooms and toys that weren't broken and futures that stretched out before them like endless golden highways. Nico had a sister. Her name was Lucia, and she was the sun around which his entire world orbited. Lucia was 5 years younger than Nico, a wisp of a girl with their mother's dark curls and their father's stubborn chin. She believed in fairy tales and happy endings. She believed that good things happened to good people. She believed, with the unshakable faith of childhood, that her big brother could slay any dragon and vanquish any villain. "Nico," she would say, tugging on his sleeve as they walked home from school, "when you grow up, will you take me to see the ocean, the real ocean, not just the river? I'll take you to see every ocean in the world." Nico always replied, "We'll sail around the whole planet, just you and me. Promise?" "Promise." Those were the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The winter Lucia turned 9 was the coldest on record. Snow piled up in the streets like barricades. Pipes froze and burst. The heating in their building failed 3 times in 1 week, leaving them huddled together under every blanket they owned, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Giuseppe had been out of work for months. His back injury had gotten worse, and the docks had no use for a man who couldn't lift. Maria was working double shifts, triple shifts, coming home with red-rimmed eyes and hands cracked from cleaning chemicals. They couldn't afford the medicine when Lucia got sick. It started as a cough. Just a cough. Nothing serious. The kind of thing that would clear up on its own in a week or two. But it didn't clear up. It got worse. The cough became a fever. The fever became something that made Lucia's breathing sound like paper tearing. Pneumonia. The free clinic doctor said, "She needs antibiotics. She needs to be in a hospital." But hospitals cost money. Antibiotics cost money. Everything cost money that the Caruso family didn't have. Nico was 15 years old. He had never stolen anything in his life. But when he saw his sister struggling to breathe, when he heard his mother sobbing in the kitchen and his father cursing God in broken Italian, something shifted inside him. He went to the pharmacy 3 blocks from their apartment. He had been there many times with his mother, watching her count out coins for aspirin and cough syrup, always buying the cheapest option because they couldn't afford anything else. The antibiotics Lucia needed were behind the counter, prescription only. But there was a moment, just a moment, when the pharmacist turned his back to answer the phone. Nico's hand moved before his brain could stop it. The bottle disappeared into his jacket. He walked out the door with his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He almost made it home. The police officer caught him 2 blocks away. Someone had seen. Someone had called. And 15-year-old Nico Caruso found himself in handcuffs, the stolen medicine confiscated, his sister's last chance at survival taken away by a system that punished desperation as severely as it punished greed. They kept him overnight, a juvenile facility with concrete walls and bars on the windows, and boys who had done things far worse than steal medicine for a dying sister. By the time they released him into his parents' custody, 23 hours had passed. Lucia died while he was in that cell. She died struggling for breath, crying out for her big brother who had promised to take her to see every ocean in the world. She died without the medicine that could have saved her. She died because Nico was too slow, too unlucky, too young to understand that the world didn't care about promises or love or little girls with dark curls and stubborn chins. Something broke in Nico that night, something fundamental, something that could never be repaired. He attended Lucia's funeral with empty eyes and a heart full of ice. He watched them lower her small coffin into the frozen ground and felt nothing, no grief, no rage, no tears. The part of him that could feel those things had died with her. In the weeks that followed, Nico made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He had tried to do the right thing, and it had cost him everything. The system, the police, the pharmacist, the hospital that wouldn't treat his sister without payment, had failed them all. So Nico would build his own system, his own rules, his own justice. He started running errands for the men who controlled his neighborhood. Small things at first, delivering packages, carrying messages,
standing lookout while business was conducted in back rooms and basement apartments. He was young, invisible, useful, and he was utterly without fear, because the worst thing that could ever happen to him had already happened. By 18, he had earned a reputation for cold efficiency. By 21, he was running his own crew. By 25, he controlled 3 blocks in Bensonhurst. By 30, he had expanded into Red Hook, Sunset Park, Bay Ridge. By 35, his territory stretched across Brooklyn and into Queens, a shadow empire built on gambling, protection, and the quiet understanding that certain problems could be solved for the right price. Somewhere along the way, Nico Caruso disappeared. In his place stood Dominic Caruso, a name that commanded respect and inspired fear in equal measure. He moved into the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. He wore tailored suits and drank expensive whiskey and surrounded himself with men who would kill or die at his command. But he never forgot Lucia. He never forgot the promise he had failed to keep, and he never ever hurt children or women. That line was absolute, non-negotiable. Anyone in his organization who crossed it faced consequences so severe that word spread throughout the criminal underworld. You could steal from Dominic Caruso and survive. You could betray him and live, if you were clever enough. But if you harmed a child or a woman, you didn't simply die, you ceased to exist. Now, 32 years after Lucia's death, a little girl named Sophie had appeared on his doorstep, a little girl with bruises on her arms and terror in her eyes, a little girl who reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he had sworn to protect. And Dominic Caruso was about to discover that some debts can never be fully paid, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. The address Sophie had given him led to a modest house in Flatbush, the kind of place that looked respectable from the outside. White siding, neatly trimmed hedges, an American flag drooping from a pole by the front door. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, the streets empty except for parked cars and the occasional stray cat. Dominic had come alone. Marcus had argued against it. His entire security team had argued against it. They didn't know the situation, they said. They didn't know how many people might be in that house. What kind of weapons? What kind of trap? Dominic Caruso was the head of their organization, and he shouldn't be walking into an unknown situation without backup. But Dominic knew something his men didn't. He knew that this wasn't a business matter. This wasn't about territory or money or respect. This was about a little girl's eyes and a promise he had made, and the ghost of a sister who had died, because no one had been willing to help. He parked his car across the street and studied the house for a long moment. One light was on, in what he guessed was the living room. The curtains were drawn, but he could see movement behind them, shadows pacing, occasionally colliding. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Team is 5 minutes out if you need us. Say the word." Dominic didn't respond. He pocketed the phone, checked the weapon holstered beneath his jacket, and stepped out into the cold. The front door was unlocked. Sloppy, or perhaps intentional, the kind of arrogance displayed by men who believed themselves masters of their domain, untouchable within the walls of their own home. Dominic opened the door silently and slipped inside. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Blood, fresh blood, metallic and thick, mixing with the stench of cheap beer and stale cigarettes. The second thing he noticed was the sound. A woman's voice, weak but defiant, pleading for something, and a man's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage, answering with contempt. "You think you can hide her from me? You think I don't know she's gone? Where is she?" "I don't know. Please, Tom, I swear I don't know where she went. She must have run when you—" The sound of impact, flesh against flesh, a cry of pain that cut off abruptly. Dominic moved through the front hallway with the fluid grace of a predator. He had done this hundreds of times, entered spaces where violence was occurring, where the outcome depended on speed and precision and the absolute absence of hesitation. The living room was a disaster. Furniture overturned, photographs shattered on the floor, shards of glass glittering like deadly confetti, and in the center of it all, a woman. She was crumpled against the base of the couch, her face a mask of blood from a cut above her eyebrow. Her arm was bent at an unnatural angle. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, the breathing of someone who had been beaten nearly to the point of unconsciousness. Standing over her was a man, broad-shouldered, running to fat, with the red face of a habitual drunk and the clenched fists of a habitual coward. This was Tom Martinez, Sophie's father, the monster who had driven his own daughter out into the winter night in nothing but a nightgown. Tom didn't notice Dominic at first. He was too focused on his wife, too absorbed in the sickening pleasure of his dominance over someone weaker. "I'll ask you one more time," Tom snarled, drawing back his fist. "Where did that little bitch go?" "She's safe," Dominic said from the doorway. "Which is more than I can say for you." Tom spun around, his bloodshot eyes widening as he took in the figure standing in his living room. Dominic Caruso wasn't a physically imposing man. Average height, lean build, silver threading through his dark hair. But there was something in his stillness, something in the absolute calm of his expression, that made Tom take an involuntary step backward. "Who the hell are you? How did you get in my house? My name doesn't matter. What matters is that your daughter came to me tonight. She knocked on my door at 2 in the morning, barefoot and freezing, begging me to hide her from her father." Tom's face twisted into something ugly. "That's none of your business. This is a family matter. Get out of my house before I call the cops. Please," the woman on the floor whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but Dominic heard her clearly. "Please help us." Dominic looked at her, really looked at her, and saw Sophie's features reflected in her battered face. The same blue eyes, now swollen nearly shut. The same dark hair, now matted with blood. This was Sophie's mother, the woman her father was trying to kill, the only family she had left in the world. "Mrs. Martinez," Dominic said, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage building in his chest. "Can you stand?" I don't you talk to my wife," Tom roared, lurching forward. "Don't you touch her. This is my house, my family. Dominic moved. Later, when Tom Martinez tried to describe what happened to the police, to the doctors, to anyone who would listen, he would say it was like being hit by a car. One moment he was charging toward the intruder in his living room. The next moment he was on the floor, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that sent shock waves of agony through his entire body, his face pressed into the blood-stained carpet. "Let me be very clear," Dominic said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to answer them truthfully. Every lie you tell, I break something. Every hesitation, I break something. Do you understand?" "Who are you?" Tom gasped. "I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. I'll—" Crack. Tom screamed as one of his fingers bent backward, snapping like a dry twig. "That was a hesitation," Dominic explained calmly. "I asked if you understood. A simple yes or no would have sufficed. Let's try again. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand. Please, God, please stop." "Good. Now, how long have you been beating your wife?" I never—" Crack. Another finger. Another scream. "I warned you about lying. Mrs. Martinez's injuries suggest this has been going on for quite some time. Years, perhaps. So I'll ask again, how long?" Tom was sobbing now. All his bravado dissolved into pathetic blubbering. 5 years, he choked out. "Maybe longer. I don't know exactly. It got worse after I lost my job. I didn't mean for it to." "And Sophie? How long have you been hurting Sophie?" Silence. A terrible, damning silence. "I see," Dominic said. "Let me tell you what's going to happen now, Mr. Martinez. I'm going to help your wife to my car. I'm going to take her to a hospital where she'll receive the treatment she needs. Then I'm going to reunite her with her daughter, who is currently safe and warm and far away from you." "You can't do this," Tom whimpered. "She's my wife. Sophie's my daughter. They belong to me. The courts." Dominic's voice was ice. "You want to talk about the courts? The same courts that grant restraining orders that abusers ignore? The same courts that return children to homes where they're beaten and terrorized? The same courts that watch women die at the hands of men like you, year after year, and do nothing?" He leaned closer, his lips nearly touching Tom's ear. "I am not the courts, Mr. Martinez. I operate outside them, and my justice is far more efficient." Dominic released Tom's arm and stood. The other man didn't move. Didn't dare to move, perhaps physically unable to move after what had been done to his hand. "Mrs. Martinez," Dominic said, turning to the woman on the floor. "Can you walk if I help you?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Sophie, is she really okay? He didn't hurt her too badly before she ran? She's safe, I promise you. Now let's get you out of here." He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they moved toward the door. She was lighter than she should have been, the kind of thin that came from chronic stress and meals sacrificed so others could eat. At the door, Dominic paused. He looked back at Tom Martinez, still crumpled on the living room floor, cradling his ruined hand and whimpering. "One more thing," Dominic said. "If you try to find them, if you contact the police or hire a lawyer, or do anything at all to locate your wife and daughter, I will know, and I will come back. Do you understand?" Tom nodded frantically. "Good. Then we understand each other." Dominic led Mrs. Martinez out into the cold night, leaving Tom Martinez alone with his pain and his broken fingers, and the dawning realization that he had finally encountered a consequence he couldn't escape. Guys, we're in the middle of this incredible story, so take a quick second to hit that like button if you're enjoying it, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment letting me know what you think so far.
Now let's continue. The hospital was a place of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells, and the quiet efficiency of people who dealt with tragedy every day. Dominic had connections here, doctors who owed him favors, administrators who knew better than to ask questions. Within minutes of arrival, Mrs. Martinez, Elena, she had finally told him her name, was in a private room receiving the best care money could buy. 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, numerous contusions and lacerations, signs of older injuries that had healed improperly, telling a story of abuse that stretched back years. Dominic sat in the hallway outside her room waiting. He had made calls to his lawyer, to a women's shelter that operated under his protection, to the judge who would expedite a restraining order and custody arrangement. By morning, Elena and Sophie Martinez would have new identities, a new home in a neighborhood far from Flatbush, and enough money to start over without ever looking back. It was the kind of thing Dominic did occasionally, solving problems for people who had no other options, using his power for something other than accumulating more power. He didn't do it for gratitude or recognition. He did it because of Lucia, because every time he saved a child from suffering, he imagined that somewhere, somehow, the universe was balancing its scales. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the scales felt heavier. His phone buzzed, a text from the brownstone. "Sophie is asking for you. She won't go to sleep until she knows her mom is okay." Dominic stared at the message for a long moment. Then he stood and walked toward Elena's room. She was awake, propped up against pillows, her arm in a sling and her face a patchwork of bandages and bruises. But her eyes, Sophie's eyes, were clear and focused as Dominic entered. "Mr. Caruso," she said, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You saved our lives. Sophie told me about coming to your door. She said she didn't know why she went there. She just ran and somehow ended up on your steps, like something was guiding her." Dominic thought about fate. He thought about the random cruelty of the universe and the equally random moments of grace that occasionally interrupted it. He thought about Lucia, dying in a frozen apartment while he sat helpless in a juvenile detention cell. "Mrs. Martinez, Elena, I need to ask you something. Why didn't you leave? You must have known there were resources, shelters, people who could help. Why did you stay with him for so long?" Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I kept hoping he would change. At first he was different, kind, charming. He made me feel like the most important person in the world. When the hitting started, he was always so sorry afterward. He cried. He promised it would never happen again. And I believed him, because I wanted to believe him." She looked down at her bandaged hands. "And then Sophie was born, and I told myself I had to keep the family together for her sake, that she needed a father, that growing up without a dad would be worse than this." "It wouldn't have been," Dominic said quietly. "I know that now. I think I always knew it. But fear is a powerful thing, Mr. Caruso. It makes you believe impossible things. It makes you accept unacceptable things. It makes you stay in a house that's killing you because leaving seems even more terrifying than staying." Dominic understood fear better than most. He had built his empire on it. But there was a difference between the fear he cultivated, the fear that kept order, that protected boundaries, that maintained the equilibrium of his world, and the kind of fear Elena described, the fear that trapped, the fear that suffocated, the fear that made victims complicit in their own destruction. "Sophie wants to see you," he said. "She wants to know you're okay." "She's at your house?" "Yes. Being looked after by people I trust. I can have her brought here if you'd like, or I can take you to her once the doctors clear you to leave." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She must have been so scared, running through the streets in the middle of the night. She could have been hurt or taken but she wasn't. She found her way to someone who could help. That's what matters. "Why?" Elena asked suddenly. "Why did you help us? You don't know us. We have nothing to offer you. Sophie said that you're a powerful man, an important man. Why would you get involved in something like this?" Dominic was silent for a long moment. The question touched something deep inside him, something he rarely allowed to surface. "I had a sister once," he finally said. "Her name was Lucia. She was about Sophie's age when she died. I couldn't save her. I couldn't protect her. I've spent the past 30 years trying to make up for that failure, and I know I never will. But every time I can help a child like Sophie, every time I can prevent what happened to Lucia from happening to someone else, it's a kind of penance, I suppose." Elena reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were strong. "You saved my daughter's life tonight," she said. "And mine. Whatever sins you're trying to atone for, Mr. Caruso, I hope you know that tonight you were an angel." An angel. Dominic almost laughed at the absurdity of it. He had done terrible things. He had ordered men killed. He had destroyed families, ruined lives, left a trail of suffering in his wake that stretched back decades. But looking at Elena Martinez, At the gratitude in her battered face, at the hope beginning to kindle in her eyes, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, redemption wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about what you did with the present. Maybe it was about the choices you made when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain, when the only reward was the knowledge that you had done something good in a world that often seemed incapable of goodness. "I should go," he said, gently withdrawing his hand. "Sophie needs to hear that you're going to be okay, and you need to rest. Will I see you again? If you need me, you'll know how to find me, but I don't think you will. You're stronger than you realize, Elena. You've survived things that would have broken most people. This is your second chance. Make the most of it." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. "Mr. Caruso, Lucia would be proud of you. Whatever happened back then, whatever you blame yourself for, she would be proud of the man you became tonight." Dominic didn't respond. He couldn't. The words hit too close to a wound that had never fully healed. He walked out of the hospital and into the cold night, feeling something shift inside him. Something that had been frozen for 32 years beginning, finally, to thaw. Sophie was asleep when Dominic returned to the brownstone. She had fallen asleep in one of the guest bedrooms, curled up on a king-sized bed that made her look even smaller than she was. Someone, probably Rosa, his housekeeper, had given her a warm bath and dressed her in an oversized t-shirt that hung to her knees. Her dark hair was still damp, spread across the pillow like a halo. Dominic stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. She looked peaceful. For the first time since he had opened his front door to find her standing there, she looked like a child should look, safe, comfortable, unburdened by fear. He thought about all the nights Lucia had fallen asleep in their tiny shared bedroom, her small body curled against his for warmth, her trust in him absolute and unquestioning. He thought about the promise he had made to take her to see every ocean in the world. He thought about the promise he had made to Sophie just a few hours ago when she stood shivering on his doorstep. "I won't hurt you. I promise. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." He had kept that promise. He had saved Sophie and her mother. He had neutralized the threat. He had done what he should have been able to do for Lucia 32 years ago. But watching Sophie sleep, Dominic realized that this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A beginning of what? He wasn't sure. He only knew that something fundamental had changed inside him tonight. The ice that had encased his heart for 3 decades was cracking. The walls he had built around his emotions were crumbling, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dominic Caruso was afraid. Not afraid of enemies or rivals or the dangers that came with his position. Afraid of feeling. Afraid of caring, afraid of letting himself love something that could be taken away. But as he stood in the doorway watching Sophie Martinez sleep, he realized that some things were worth being afraid of. Some risks were worth taking. Some promises were worth keeping, no matter the cost. He had failed Lucia. He couldn't change that. He couldn't bring her back. He couldn't undo the years of violence and darkness that had followed her death. But maybe, just maybe, he could do better going forward. Maybe he could be the kind of man that a little girl would run to when she was scared, the kind of man who answered knocks on the door at 2 a.m., the kind of man who kept his promises, even when keeping them was hard. Maybe he could be the kind of man Lucia would be proud of. Dominic turned and walked back to his study. There was work to be done, arrangements to make, people to contact, a future to build for 2 people who had been given a second chance at life. But for the first time in 32 years, the work didn't feel like penance, it felt like purpose. The weeks that followed were a period of transformation that no one who knew Dominic Caruso, not his enemies, not his allies, not even his closest confidants, could have predicted. Elena Martinez was released from the hospital after 3 days. True to his word, Dominic had arranged everything. A small but comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Westchester, far from Flatbush and the memories that haunted it. New identities for both mother and daughter. A modest trust fund that would cover living expenses and Sophie's education through college. Letters of recommendation and job leads for Elena, whose skills as an administrative assistant would transfer easily to her new life. And perhaps most importantly, the absolute certainty that Tom Martinez would never find them. Tom had been dealt with in a manner that Dominic preferred not to discuss in detail. Suffice to say that when men came to his hospital room, men who spoke quietly and moved efficiently and left no traces of their visit, Tom had been given a very clear understanding of his options. He could disappear quietly, take his broken fingers and his shattered pride to some distant corner of the country, and never attempt to contact his former family again. Or he could stay and learn firsthand what happened to people who crossed Dominic Caruso. Tom chose to disappear. But while Elena and Sophie were adjusting to their new lives in Westchester, something unexpected was happening in the Brooklyn brownstone. Sophie didn't want to leave. "Can we visit Uncle Dominic?" She asked her mother every few days. "I miss him. I miss his house. I miss Rosa's cooking. Can we please go visit?" Elena was hesitant at first. She understood, better than her daughter, exactly who Dominic Caruso was and what he did for a living. The world he inhabited was dangerous, violent, unsuited for a child who had already experienced too much trauma. But she also understood something else. She understood that Sophie had formed a connection with the man who had saved their lives. She understood that children sometimes saw past the surfaces that adults couldn't penetrate. And she understood that Dominic, whatever else he might be, had shown her daughter nothing but kindness. So the visits began. Every Sunday afternoon, Elena would drive Sophie down to Brooklyn Heights. They would park in the brownstones' gated driveway, walk up the steps where Sophie had once stood shivering and terrified, and ring the bell. And every Sunday, Dominic would be waiting. He wasn't sure when it happened, when the visits became the highlight of his week, when the sound of Sophie's laughter in his hallways began to feel like sunlight breaking through clouds. He only knew that something was changing inside him, something that had been dormant for so long he had assumed it was dead. He taught Sophie to play chess. She was terrible at it at first, making moves that had no strategy and no purpose, but she improved quickly. By her 5th lesson, she was thinking 2 moves ahead. By her 10th, she was beating him occasionally, though whether these were genuine victories or Dominic allowing her to win remained their little secret. He read her stories, not the fairy tales she had grown up with, but different stories, myths and legends from around the world, tales of heroes who made mistakes and villains who had reasons and endings that weren't always happy but were always true. Sophie listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting to ask questions that surprised him with their insight. "Why did the hero let the bad guy go?" she asked once, after a particularly complex story about a king who showed mercy to his defeated enemy. "Because sometimes," Dominic said carefully, "the bravest thing isn't destruction, it's allowing someone the chance to become better than they were." Sophie considered this with the seriousness only children can muster. "Is that what you did with my daddy? You let him go so he could become better?" Dominic was silent for a long moment. He thought about Tom Martinez, about the broken fingers and the threats, and the absolute certainty in his voice when he described what would happen if Tom ever resurfaced. "I let him go because punishing him wasn't my job," he finally said. "My job was keeping you and your mama safe. Once you were safe, what happened to your daddy became his own responsibility. Do you think he'll become better?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people can change. Some people choose not to. But either way, you don't have to worry about him anymore. That's a promise." Sophie nodded, satisfied. Then she moved her knight into a position that put Dominic's king in check, and the conversation shifted back to chess. These moments, these quiet Sunday afternoons of games and stories and gentle conversation, began to reshape Dominic in ways he hadn't anticipated. He found himself looking forward to the end of the week. He found himself buying books he thought Sophie might enjoy, researching topics she had expressed curiosity about, making mental notes of questions he could ask her. He found himself, in short, becoming attached. And attachment, for a man like Dominic Caruso, was dangerous. His enemies would use it against him if they discovered it. His rivals would target Sophie and Elena to gain leverage over him. The very act of caring about someone outside his organization made him vulnerable in ways he hadn't been in decades. He knew this. He understood the risks, and for the first time in his life, he decided they were worth taking. 6 months after the night Sophie knocked on his door, Dominic made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He began stepping back from the business, not retiring completely. That was impossible, and perhaps unwise. Too many operations depended on his guidance. Too many people relied on his protection. Simply walking away would create a power vacuum that would be filled by men far less principled than himself. But he delegated more responsibilities. He promoted trusted lieutenants to positions where they could make decisions without his constant oversight. He reduced his involvement in the day-to-day operations that had consumed his life for 3 decades. And he spent more time with Sophie. Their Sunday visits expanded. Soon Elena was comfortable enough to drop Sophie off for entire weekends. The brownstone, which had always felt like a fortress, began to feel like a home. Rosa, the housekeeper, started keeping Sophie's favorite snacks in the kitchen. Marcus, the head of security, learned to tolerate the little girl's habit of asking him endless questions about his job. One Saturday afternoon, as Sophie was helping Rosa bake cookies in the kitchen, she looked up at Dominic with chocolate chips smeared on her face and asked the question he had been dreading. "Uncle Dominic, do you have kids?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He thought about Lucia, about all the years he had convinced himself he would never have children, Because he would never risk loving something that could be taken away. No, he said quietly. I don't have kids. Why not? It's complicated, Sophie. Mommy says it's complicated when she means she doesn't want to talk about it. Despite himself, Dominic smiled. Your mommy is a smart woman. But you're good with kids, Sophie insisted. You're good with me. You teach me chess and read me stories and you never yell. Not even when I accidentally broke that vase last week. That vase was ugly anyway. So why don't you have your own kids? Is it because of Lucia? Dominic froze. He had told Elena the story, and Elena had apparently told Sophie. Or perhaps Sophie had simply overheard. Either way, the child was looking at him with those piercing blue eyes that saw far more than they should. Yes, he admitted. It's because of Lucia. You're scared, Sophie said. It wasn't a question. I'm scared, Dominic confirmed. Sophie put down her mixing spoon and walked around the counter to stand in front of him. She was still small, barely reaching his waist, but in that moment she seemed larger than the room. Lucia wouldn't want you to be scared forever, she said. She'd want you to be happy. How do you know what Lucia would want? Because she was nice. You said so. Nice people want other nice people to be happy. And you're nice, Uncle Dominic, even if you don't think so. Dominic knelt down so he was at Sophie's eye level. Up close he could see the scars of what she had survived. Faint marks on her arms that were fading but not gone, a wariness in her eyes that would probably never fully disappear, but he could also see strength, resilience, the unbreakable spirit of a child who had walked through fire and emerged still capable of love. Sophie, he said, you are the bravest person I have ever met. Braver than you? Much braver than me. I was a coward for a very long time. I did bad things because I was afraid of feeling good things. You never did that. Even when you were scared, you kept your heart open. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Sophie considered this. Then she hugged him. It was sudden and fierce and completely unexpected. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, her chocolate-stained cheek pressed against his shoulder, her heart beating against his chest like a bird's. Dominic froze. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him. Certainly not like this. Not with this kind of unconditional affection, this simple human need for connection. Slowly, carefully, he put his arms around her and hugged back. I love you, Uncle Dominic, Sophie whispered. The words broke something inside him. Something that had been locked away for 32 years finally shattered, releasing a flood of emotion he had spent decades suppressing. I love you too, Sophie, he said, and for the first time since Lucia died, he felt tears running down his face. 2 years passed. 2 years of Sunday visits that became weekend stays that became something like family. 2 years of watching Sophie grow taller, smarter, more confident. 2 years of seeing Elena flourish in her new job, her new life, her new identity as a survivor rather than a victim. 2 years of change for Dominic Caruso. He was still a powerful man, still a feared man, still the ghost of Brooklyn, whose name commanded respect throughout the criminal underworld. But he was also something else now, something he had never expected to be. He was a father, not legally. That was complicated, given his lifestyle and his past, but in every way that mattered. Sophie had become his daughter. She called him Uncle Dominic, but the term had evolved into something more, an acknowledgement of the bond between them, a recognition that blood wasn't the only thing that made a family. The brownstone had transformed. Sophie's artwork hung on the refrigerator. Her books filled shelves in the study. Her laughter echoed through hallways that had once known only silence and shadow. And Dominic had transformed too. He was gentler now, more patient. The cold calculation that had defined him for decades had softened into something warmer, something more human. His men noticed the change but were wise enough not to comment on it. The world outside still saw the ghost, fearsome, untouchable, deadly. But inside the brownstone's walls, there was just a man learning to be a father, a man keeping a promise to a little girl who had knocked on his door at 2 a.m. On Sophie's 10th birthday, Dominic threw a party. Not a lavish affair. Sophie had expressly forbidden anything embarrassing, but a gathering of people who mattered. Elena was there, of course, radiant in a way she never could have been 2 years ago. Rosa baked a 3-tier chocolate cake. Marcus stood by the door trying to look stern and failing completely when Sophie convinced him to wear a party hat, and Dominic watched it all with something that felt suspiciously like joy. After the party, after the guests had left and Elena had taken Sophie home, she still lived in Westchester, though there was talk of her moving closer to Brooklyn. Dominic sat alone in his study. The brownstone was quiet. The night pressed against the windows, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, the silence felt peaceful rather than oppressive. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Thank you for the best birthday ever, Uncle Dominic. I love you to the moon and back. Sophie. He smiled and typed back, I love you too, little one. Sweet dreams. Then he sat back in his chair and thought about the journey that had brought him here, the grief that had forged him into a monster, the chance encounter that had begun to transform him back into a man, the little girl who had somehow, impossibly, saved him by allowing him to save her. He thought about Lucia, not with the crushing guilt that usually accompanied her memory, but with something gentler, something like peace. I kept my promise, he whispered to the empty room. Maybe not the way either of us imagined, but I kept it. Somewhere he liked to imagine Lucia was smiling. Life continued. Sophie started middle school and discovered a passion for science. She talked endlessly about biology and chemistry and the possibility of becoming a doctor someday. A dream that Dominic encouraged with books and tutors and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she would never have to worry about affording medical school. Elena met someone, a teacher at Sophie's school, a kind man named David who made her laugh and treated Sophie like his own daughter. Dominic ran background checks, of course. Old habits died hard, but found nothing except a history of volunteer work and a troubling tendency to root for the wrong baseball team. What do you think of him? Elena asked Dominic one Sunday, while Sophie was occupied with a chess puzzle in the study. He seems decent, Dominic admitted. Boring, but decent. Elena laughed. Boring is exactly what we need after everything we've been through. Fair point. He wants to meet you. Officially, I mean. He knows you're important to Sophie and he wants to, I don't know, get your blessing, I suppose. My blessing? You're her father, Dominic. In every way that matters. Of course he wants your blessing. The words hit him harder than they should have. Her father. In every way that matters. Bring him by next Sunday, Dominic said. We'll see if he can survive one of Rosa's dinners. David survived. More than survived. He charmed Rosa, impressed Marcus with his knowledge of obscure military history, and most importantly, made Sophie giggle by letting her beat him at chess with a strategy so obvious even a beginner could have seen it coming. He let me win, Sophie whispered to Dominic afterward, when David and Elena were saying their goodbyes at the door. On purpose. I know, Dominic replied. He wanted to make you happy. That's what you do sometimes too. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sophie grinned. Sure you don't. The wedding was held the following spring, in a garden venue that Elena had found through a friend. It was small and intimate, just family and close friends with flowers everywhere and sunshine streaming through the trees. Sophie was the flower girl. She wore a white dress with a yellow sash and took her responsibilities extremely seriously, scattering petals with the precision of a military operation. And when the ceremony came to the part where the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Dominic stood. Elena had asked him weeks ago if he would do this, if he would stand in the place of a father, giving her away to a new life with a new family. He had argued that it wasn't appropriate, that his presence at the wedding would raise too many questions, that he should remain in the background where he belonged. But Elena had been insistent, and Sophie had added her voice to the chorus. And eventually Dominic had run out of reasons to say no. So he stood in that sun-dappled garden, surrounded by people who knew nothing about who he really was, and he spoke the traditional words with a voice that only wavered once. I do. Later at the reception, Sophie found him standing alone at the edge of the dance floor. She was holding a plate of cake and wearing the satisfied expression of a child who had gotten exactly what she wanted. You cried during the ceremony, she observed. I did not. You did. I saw you. I had something in my eye. You had tears in your eye. Dominic sighed. You're relentless, you know that? Mom says I get it from you. Your mother is a troublemaker. Sophie laughed and handed him her plate of cake. Here, you look like you need chocolate. He took the plate, but instead of eating, he just looked at her. At this remarkable girl who had somehow become the most important person in his world. Sophie, he said, I need to tell you something. That sounds serious. It is serious. I need you to know that, no matter what happens, no matter what changes, you will always have a place with me. David is a good man, and he'll be a good stepfather to you, but that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. You understand? Sophie set down her fork. Her expression shifted from playful to solemn. You're scared I'll forget about you, she said. Now that Mom's remarried and we're going to be a real family. Dominic didn't answer. He didn't need to. Uncle Dominic, Sophie said, using the name that had come to mean so much more than its literal translation. You saved my life. You saved Mom's life. You taught me chess and told me stories and made me feel safe when I didn't know what safe felt like anymore. Do you really think I could ever forget that? I don't know, Dominic admitted. I've never been part of a family before. Not since Lucia. I don't know how any of this works. Sophie took his hand. Her fingers were sticky with frosting, but he didn't care. It works like this, she said. You love me. I love you. We stay in each other's lives. That's it. That's the whole thing. Hey, Dominic squeezed her hand. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. They stood there together, watching Elena and David dance their first dance as husband and wife. The music was soft, the evening light was golden, and for the first time in his life, Dominic Caruso felt like he belonged somewhere. 15 years later, the hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft murmur of voices in the hallway. Dominic sat beside the bed, his aged hands clasped around smaller, younger fingers. Sophie, Dr. Sophie Martinez Reyes now, having taken David's surname but never forgotten her roots, was asleep in the chair on the other side of the bed. She had been there for 3 days straight, refusing to leave, taking breaks only when the nurses forced her to eat something. In the bed between them lay the newest member of the family, Lucia Rose Reyes, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Dark hair, blue eyes, tiny fingers that gripped Dominic's thumb with surprising strength. Sophie had named her daughter after the aunt she had never met, after the girl whose memory had shaped Dominic into the man he became, after the sister who had been lost, but was now, in some small way, found again. She's beautiful, Dominic whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and wake either mother or daughter. She looks like you, Elena said from the doorway. She had aged gracefully, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful. David stood beside her, his arm around her waist. She looks like Sophie, Dominic corrected. Who looks like you? Same thing, in a way. Sophie stirred, opening her eyes slowly. She looked first at her daughter, then at the man who had saved her life all those years ago. You've been here all night again, she murmured. The nurses are going to start charging you rent. Let them try. Sophie smiled. The same smile she had worn as a child, the smile that had first cracked the ice around Dominic's heart. Thank you for being here. For everything. She trailed off, unable to find words for the magnitude of what she wanted to express. I made you a promise, Dominic said simply, the night you knocked on my door. I said I wouldn't let anyone hurt you ever again. I said I would protect you. You kept that promise. I tried to. Sophie reached across the bed and took his hand, just as she had at Elena's wedding all those years ago. You did more than try, Uncle Dominic. You gave me everything. A life, a future, a family. I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever comes next, I will spend the rest of my life making sure my daughter knows who you are, what you did, how much you loved us. Dominic felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. He didn't try to hide them this time. I was a monster once, he said quietly. I did terrible things. I hurt people. I told myself it was necessary, that it was business, that I had no choice. But the truth is, I chose violence because it was easier than feeling, because I was too afraid to love anything that could be taken away. He looked down at baby Lucia, who had opened her eyes and was staring up at him with the curious, unfocused gaze of the newly born. You changed that, Sophie. You and your mother. You showed me that love isn't a weakness. It's the only thing that matters, the only thing that redeems all the rest. Sophie squeezed his hand. Lucia would be proud of you. The first Lucia, I mean. Your sister. I hope so, Dominic said. I really hope so. They sat in comfortable silence as the morning light filled the room, watching little Lucia drift back to sleep. Outside, the city carried on with its endless business. Deals being made, debts being collected, power shifting from hand to hand. The world Dominic had built was still out there, still operating, still casting its long shadow. But inside this room, there was only family, only love, only the living proof that even the darkest souls could find their way back to the light. And somewhere, Dominic liked to imagine, a little girl with dark curls and a stubborn chin was watching over all of them, smiling, at peace. When Dominic Caruso died 3 years later, peacefully, in his sleep, in the brownstone where he had spent the last 2 decades learning how to live, Sophie was by his side. She had been a doctor for 5 years by then, working in emergency medicine, saving lives every day. But she still made time to visit her uncle every Sunday, just as she had when she was a frightened 8-year-old who had knocked on a stranger's door at 2 a.m. Tell me a story, she had asked him on their last afternoon together, echoing a request from decades past. And Dominic had told her the only story that mattered. The story of a girl who had saved a monster. The story of a promise kept. The story of how love, in the end, was stronger than fear. Once upon a time, he had said, his voice weak but still warm, there was a little girl named Sophie who was braver than she knew. She knocked on a door in the middle of the night, and she changed everything. That's not how the story goes, Sophie had protested through her tears. The story is about you saving me. No, Dominic had replied. squeezing her hand with the last of his strength. The story was always about you saving me. He closed his eyes, and the ghost of Brooklyn finally found peace. At his funeral, Sophie stood before a crowd of people who had come from every corner of the criminal world and the legitimate one. Old associates, former rivals, men and women whose lives Dominic had touched in ways both terrible and tender. She didn't speak about his crimes. She didn't pretend he had been a saint. She simply told the truth. He was complicated, she said. He did things he wasn't proud of. He hurt people, and he was hurt in return. But when I needed him most, when I was a scared little girl with nowhere else to go, he opened his door. He let me in. He kept me safe. She paused, looking out at the assembled faces. That's what I want you to remember about Dominic Caruso. Not the power or the fear or the legend. Just a man who answered a knock on the door at 2 a.m. and chose to be better than he had ever been before. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the cemetery was quiet, Sophie stood alone at her uncle's grave. Little Lucia, now 3 years old, stood beside her, clutching a single white rose. "Who was he, Mommy?" Lucia asked, looking at the headstone. Sophie knelt down so she was at her daughter's eye level, just as Dominic had done with her so many years ago in the foyer of the Brooklyn brownstone. "He was my guardian angel," she said. "He saved my life when I was your age, and I want you to remember his name, Lucia. I want you to remember that good people sometimes come from unexpected places, that love can change even the hardest hearts, and that no matter how dark things seem, there's always someone willing to help if you're brave enough to ask." Lucia nodded solemnly. Then she stepped forward and placed the white rose on her great-uncle's grave. "Thank you," she whispered, echoing words her mother had spoken decades before. "Thank you for coming." Sophie took her daughter's hand, and together they walked away from the grave, into the sunshine, into the future that Dominic Caruso had made possible. Behind them, carved into the headstone beneath his name and dates, were the words Sophie had chosen. He kept his promise. Thank you so much for staying until the end of this story. It's a reminder that redemption is always possible, that love is stronger than fear, and that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who needed saving themselves. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, no matter how dark the night seems, morning always comes, and sometimes all it takes to change a life is the courage to knock on a door and ask for help. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you in the next video. The end.